All right, let's return to our earlier correspondent. Moving from oil issues to food, French President Emmanuel Macron says he hopes an agreement can be reached soon with Russia to allow more exports of food from Ukraine. Macron made the comments at the EU summit in Brussels, where European leaders were joined virtually by African Union Chair Macky Sall for talks on global food security and the fallout of the conflict. Russian forces have been blockading Ukraine's Black Sea ports, meaning key exports of wheat, corn, sunflower oil and other products have been stalled. Let's return now to our correspondent, Rosie Birchard, have been following that summit for us in Brussels. Rosie, thank you very much. The UN is warning that tens of millions of people are at risk of hunger and food insecurity. Meanwhile, we've got this grain trapped in Ukraine. What are the plans to try and get it out?
Quite right. Tens of millions of people at risk of food insecurity and hunger, and tens of millions of tons of grain trapped in Ukraine. Now, the EU has been trying to find alternative export routes for Ukrainian grain. So through the European Union, by land, rail and river, there has been some success so far. So some Ukrainian grains have already been exported via a Romanian port and some also by rail through Lithuania. But this is certainly no easy task, and there are some serious political choices to be made here as well, not least because one of the other options for exporting these grains perhaps more efficiently and quickly would be to use routes through Belarus. But that is another country which is under EU sanctions. Belarus is seen as aiding and abetting Russia in its war against Ukraine. So EU leaders trying to find solutions here, but of course incredibly difficult, complex task with incredibly high stakes.
Reportedly, Russia says it could allow exports if the sanctions are lifted by the West. Any chance of that?
That's another political question that leaders have been mulling, and of course the risks here with these tens of millions of people facing hunger are indeed very real. But there is some division within the bloc on how to proceed here. I spoke, for example, to Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. She says these suggestions from Russia that it could lift this blockade in return for a relaxation of sanctions are nothing more than pure blackmail. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Macron, the French President, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have been in talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. They've suggested some sort of an arrangement in the format of the United Nations to try and broker a deal here to get this food flowing. Now, Ukraine is such a major global food producer, around 50% of the world's sunflower oil, 15% of its corn, that the stakes here, as I said, are really high. There is a difficulty and a divergence, however, among EU states on to what extent to engage with Russia on this, to engage with it as a partner in the United Nations, for example, given that the bloc is now adding fresh sanctions against Russia over this ongoing war in Ukraine, which is now nearing its 100-day mark.
Sure, it has been a long time indeed, and the time must be ticking here because this food won't stay fresh forever. There's an expiration date. President Macky Sall expected to visit Moscow soon. Are the European Union and the African Union on the same page here?
Well, EU leaders are insisting they are on the same page, but there are some quite clear differences in their approach here. For example, EU officials here in Brussels keep insisting over and over that this global food shortage, these fears around it at least, are absolutely caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, by Russia blockading those Black Sea ports and bombing wheat fields. They say the blame lies solely with Russia. However, Macky Sall, chairperson of the African Union and president of Senegal, in his address to EU leaders earlier today, argued that some EU sanctions, particularly cutting Russian banks off or certain Russian banks off from the SWIFT international payment system, is in fact harmful for African countries. And we've also heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa saying what he calls bystander countries are suffering due to the fallout. Now, EU countries, however, really trying to stress here, they are concerned that Russia may be leading a disinformation campaign on the African continent, trying to blame Western sanctions for these food shortages when in fact Moscow is blockading these ports and not allowing wheat to be exported. Now, a very difficult political discussion to be had there, of course, and when Macky Sall heads to Moscow, there may be fears here in Brussels that he is, in fact, not on that same page politically due to some of those words he gave to leaders today, those warnings about how sanctions may be impacting African nations amid these fears around global food shortages and millions of people facing potential hunger.
Yeah, sad situation either way. We'll follow that trip to Moscow. Thank you very much, correspondent at the EU in Brussels, Rosie Birchard.